So I wanted to start out with a bigger picture question and get your thoughts about the value of music and the arts during this period of social political complexity.
Ooh, um, I think it's important in many ways. It's important in terms of a commentary on what's happening in the world, as the Fear album was really. Some things unfortunately never change. Um, it's for some people it's an escape when the whole world's going to hell and the things they thought were fixed in their lives suddenly turn to quicksand. Um, yeah, I think music is something that means all sorts of things to all sorts of people, but it can be an escape, it can be a comfort, and it can be a battle cry.
Well, you mentioned the Fear album, and of course, in 2013, Marillion released the song Gaza, which you described at that time as the most important song the band had ever done. Tell me about your thoughts on it now in the current global context.
Oh, well, it's a terrible, terrible situation. Um, it's I just can't understand why the rest of the world stands by and let the people starve, really. That the Hamas attack was barbaric and a disgusting thing, but I think what the Israeli military and the heads of state have done to the Palestinian people in Gaza since then, it just blows my mind, really. That I mean, it's not appropriate. That I mean, it's all so many lies and bullshit. And I don't understand Trump's support of the Israeli state in this situation. Really, it's really difficult. I mean, I'm not anti-Semitic at all, but it makes you sort of disgusted that a, a country with such military and technological su supremacy can basically virtually wipe out a neighboring state like that. And I think the suffering of the Palestinian people will go down in history, really. And I think it's something that maybe in future generations, Israelis might or should be ashamed of. But that's just my personal viewpoint.
Why hasn't the group been performing that song given its incredible relevance at the moment?
Well, primarily because the Marillion weekends are a kind of celebration of the band, and it would have been maybe too much of a negative thing in that context. Not to say that we're not going to play it again when we next tour or when we got a lot of big shows in the summer of next year. I think there's quite a high probability that that song will come back.
All right, well, let's move on to the debut Bioscope album, Gentō, which, is of course a very ambitious instrumental project. And you said it's critical that music communicates an idea or a story. And in this case, I believe it's reflecting humanity's fascination with the moving image. But explore that framework and how the music reflects it.
Well, basically, the way that Thorsten and I work, it's a lot of ideas based on improvisation, or our two very different worlds kind of collide. But the end result is something that is quite cinematic. It's like I've said in the past with the Ghost of Pripyat, it's like soundtrack to imaginary movies, and I think that's also the case with the Bioscope album. Um, so as the ideas were evolving, and you try and work out what they are and what the project should be. Um, I became aware of the history of Bioscope or Bioscope, as it it's also known in Germany, which was one of the early film projection systems developed by two brothers in Berlin in the 1800s. The term means different things in different parts of the world. In parts of, I think, Africa, it's just a generic term for cinema. It's also like this viewing device, which is, I don't know if you've seen my Facebook page, but it's on my background at the moment. And it's like a device with like porthole windows, like four each side. I think, and the one that the photo of, it's actually a record player on the top of it as well. But basically, people can peep through this as these moving images are shown inside, and it's still in use apparently in parts of India and Africa. So it's yeah, it's quite a fascinating thing, and I thought Bioscope would be the perfect name for the project since it was also cinematic. Obviously, Thorsten and Tangerine Dream have done a lot of film soundtracks in the past, um, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do one with Bioscope at some point in the future. But I thought it's such a strong visual image that I took that as the theme, and then found other themes that tied in with that uh, concept. Um, so yeah, so all the tracks became about that man's fascination with a moving image.
Well, what unique opportunity did collaborating with Thorsten represent for you?
Well, I wouldn't say he's a throwback, but he's someone because of his work with Tangerine Dream. He had a foot in both camps of the old tech analog sequenced world with hypnotic pulsing rhythms and melodies, and the sound design and plugins and all the things that are available in the modern age when it comes to keyboard sounds and technology and um, yeah, it's all sorts of things that are very, very different from Mark Kelly's approach when it comes to working with Marillion. So it's like a whole different palette of colors. Um, and sometimes he just has to set something going, and I immediately I would find it inspiring. I listened to Tangerine Dream when I was 15 or 16, like Ricochet and Stratosphere, and I've always loved like Vangelis's music and especially his film soundtracks. So that's kind of part of my upbringing, if you like. And in fact, some of the first albums I ever bought when I was like 13 or 14 were actually film soundtracks. Um, Before I kind of discovered rock music, really.
Well, give me some insight into the creative process you engaged in with Thorsten to realize these pieces.
Um, Any way I can describe it, really, is like a musical conversation. We both do what we do. There's no advanced planning, there's no pretense, there's no egos. It is purely something that's the joy of creating. Um, and yeah, we love each other's work. We've got great respect for each other. Um, I think we share a sense of humor. Um, yeah, not one crossword in all the time that we've kind of worked together. So yeah, it's just a very pleasurable experience. I love Berlin as a city. I think it has a unique atmosphere. Obviously, we've got a long history there, going back 40 years with the Misplaced Childhood album. But it's still, even after the reunification of Germany, it's still got an incredible energy, and it's a completely different attitude to any other city in Germany, in my experience.
Now, the album involved Thorsten processing your guitar work. Tell me what he was doing and how you collaborated in that realm.
Well, that's just I mean, a lot of the processed guitar on the album is stuff that I did myself with pedals, things like there's an Eventide H90 pedal, which has some amazing sounds. There's parts on Vanishing Point where the only way I can describe it is it sounds like icicles. It's a really unusual sound. There's another patch that actually sounds like the human voice. So I just kind of a dip into all these different sounds sometimes. But I mean, Thorsten would take, there's a section in Vanishing Point where he's taken a guitar loop and he's processed it through a plug-in of a Moog filter. So it's a very sort of pulsing, slightly sinister kind of loop that is created. Um, but he does a lot of that. He loves granular synthesis and looping as well. So yeah, it's quite adventurous. But it's a really interesting combination of the adventurous and the traditional, really.
Now, with Thorsten's sequence structures change, after you started layering guitar on them sometimes?
Yeah, it's hard to really fully describe. We'd kind of work in sections and improvise, and then they kind of become building blocks for the final arrangement. Things would carry on evolving right to the last minute, in terms of leaving sections out, um, additional overdubs. I mean, there was some overdubs I did in the morning before I went to hear the track being mixed in the afternoon. It was that down to the wire occasionally. You're adding little details all the time to try and make an arrangement really. I mean, it's like a patchwork of sound that you wanted to hold the listener's attention. I mean, I think there's quite a lot of melodic uh, guitar parts, melodies, and riffs and arpeggios and stuff on the record. But I think that in combination with some of the sound design that we both did, I think it holds the listener's attention.
How would you contrast the approach you took with Thorsten as a duo in this context, versus working with, say, Marillion or the Wishing Tree?
Um, with Marillion, it's these days, well, for the last 20 years, it's been about the five of us getting together in a room, or six if you count the producer, and improvising and recording the moments, and again using those as building blocks in the construction of the songs. I mean, it wasn't always like that. You go back to albums like Afraid of Sunlight and even Marbles. There was more kind of people, individuals developing ideas and bringing them to the band. But we kind of seem to have settled into this pattern of writing by jamming, by improvising. And it's because we can't always agree what constitutes a great idea, and we argue. So by doing it this way, and then only choosing the ideas to work on that we all enjoy, it negates a lot of negative energy, you could say, and a lot of arguments. With the Wishing Tree, it was a bit different. That was like a collaboration, really, between myself and Hannah. Um, so, but obviously, that's kind of a more of a traditional song type album. Where one of the things with Bioscope, because it's all instrumental, you have to try and hold the listener's attention without words, without lyrics, without vocal melodies, and Thorsten said it quite poetically in one of the interviews we did recently. He said, "Well, you sing with your guitar. It takes the place of a vocalist. Melodies that you play and little melodic hooks." So yeah, I think that's true to a certain extent in this kind of music.
Now, you've said it can be a challenge to work with music that has a lot of space in it. Tell me about the thought process that goes through your head when you're trying to figure out how to react to these very elongated structures.
Well, it's two things really. It's the part you play and the sound you use. Sometimes just pulling up a certain sound, like I say, like this patch on the eventide that sounds like like icicles. It's you don't even really you need to kind of play by instinct, and the sound will really dictate the sort of part that will work in that context. But what you've also got to be aware of not filling all the gaps up, because a lot of this music is all about space. So the silence is as important. Oh, not so much silence, but the less busy parts of the tracks make things mean more when they do happen.
Well, now you mentioned that you are a fan of a lot of the classic Berlin electronic era records. How did that influence your approach when you worked on the music? Did you find sort of those listening experiences from your youth kind of reflecting back and how you approach this music.
Well, I actually also played live with Tangerine Dream for 3 shows as well. So that kind of gave me probably more of an understanding on, where to play and what to play and what not to play. 'Cause that their music especially has a very hypnotic quality and a lot of repetition. Um, but part of the concerts with the thing that they do where they have what's called the session at the end of the set, where it's like a 30-minute improvisation. And that is, it's a challenge. It's like you're pulling rabbits out of the hat all the time, trying to do something interesting and not repeating yourself and finding something that enhances what's already happening. So that I think that was a good preparation for some of it, even though I think the Bioscope album has a lot more changes musically than Tangerine Dream probably has.
Well, tell me about Alex Reeves' contributions and how they were integrated.
Well, the last session we did in Berlin, December of last year, we thought, we could well have an album here, but I think one of the things that would really improve it would be some live drums. So Thorsten and I spent about an hour and a half on YouTube looking at various drummers, some well known, some not so well known, some very very technical. Um, and we knew what we didn't want. We didn't want someone who was going to be overplaying over it, or you know needing to show their incredible technique every bar. Um, and a friend of mine, Matt Pryor, plays guitar for Bonnie Tyler, had worked with Alex and on various sessions and recommended him. So we checked out Alex's playing on YouTube and really liked it. Thought it could be very interesting. And I emailed him. He was on holiday in Australia at the time, but I sent him some rust of the tracks, and he got back to me straight away and he said he absolutely loved it. He'd love to work on the album, and we then arranged for Thorsten to fly over to the UK in March of this year, and the two of us went to Alex's studio, his little drum studio in North London, and he recorded all the album in 2 days, which was pretty incredible, really, because he hadn't rehearsed or routined it at all. He was reacting in the moment all the time, and but at the same time he's very technical, so he'd record everything into Logic, and then if something wasn't he didn't feel was right, he would stop and try something else, and he'd change the drums and get things down off the wall and hit them like a fire extinguisher, I think, at one point. So it was very adventurous, but a great groove and just an amazing timekeeper. Um, we didn't he had didn't have to redo anything because he dropped a clanger because he'd made a mistake. It was just purely because he thought maybe the sound could be better. So once we heard live drums on the music that we'd written, it seemed to complete it. It seemed to bring that real organic quality and groove to the music. And yeah, well, we were both there on the sofa in his little studio, just smiling at each other, thinking, "This is incredible. We just never imagined it could do this." And yeah, no, it's very very exciting. In fact, we're gonna go out in December and play a few live shows, and Alex is going to join us, so that's going to be a lot of fun.
And of course, Alex is known for his work with Elbow. I'm curious what your thoughts about that band are.
Yeah, I really like them. I think they're one of the most interesting UK bands. They're not quite the media darlings that some bands like Radiohead are, but they are still. They're probably a lot hipper than Marillion, put it that way. Not difficult.
Well, you mentioned live dates with Thorsten. You mentioned potentially soundtrack work. Give me a bigger picture view on where this collaboration could go in the future.
Well, we'll definitely make another album. Um, I'm already thinking. Want to finish the next thing, just to skip back. I've been working on this album on and off since, like, say, 2019. Around about the same time, I've been working on an album with Steve Hackett. And a bit longer than that is I've been working on the Reventolet album, my space-themed instrumental album that Mr. Wilson's just beat me to. But one of the tracks for if it won't be on Reverend Too Late, but it's a similar kind of space themed concept I have is to write some music for the opening of the very large telescope that's currently being constructed um, in the observatories in the Atacama Desert, where that we played. But there's a group of observatories last year, Paranal and Alma, and this new giant telescope is kind of the next mountain along to Paranal in that area. So it's probably going to be going live, I think, in another 4 or 5 years. And I'd really like to play at the opening of the telescope with a piece of music with Thorsten and I. So that's kind of my plan for Bioscope's future.
All right. Well, I'd like to go into some of your other solo albums in a minute, but just going back to Bioscope, I'm curious what your thoughts are about how AI is cranking out sequence-based music by the metric ton at the moment. It's landing in these generic playlists to the tune of tens of millions of listeners who seem particularly uncritical of its origins. So my question for you is, what do you feel humans can do in this realm that AI can't, that people should be looking to and appreciating?
Oh, that's difficult because it's a generational thing, isn't it? I think give it another 5 years and people will be growing up and all they've listened to would be AI music, or maybe another 10 years. Um, I still think there's something that happens when several humans get together and I can't imagine AI writing the Bioscope album just in terms of how the different elements interact with each other. But nothing is impossible. That's part of the thing that the record companies try and get in the contracts these days, that they have the rights to license your music to be used by AI training companies. Which really that seems like a very bizarre thing to ask an artist to do. Um, But I mean, it's in Spotify's interest if they create thousands or hundreds of thousands of AI generated tracks because they don't have to pay any artist royalties. So, I mean, that's a sad fact. At the end of the day, it all comes back to money. And it comes back to people, I mean, some people not knowing the difference, not hearing the difference, not caring. For some people, music is audio wallpaper that it doesn't matter. It just does it's like sets a mood or something. And I think unless music resonates more deeply with you than that, then you'll be perfectly happy listening to your AI drivel.
All right, well, let's move on to other elements of your solo career. Back in 2021, you unveiled La Sia from the forthcoming album you mentioned, Ravantule. Tell me about that piece and what we can expect from this album when it eventually emerges.
Well, I wrote that because we were asked to play at Lucia Observatory for the full solar eclipse in 2019, I think it was. Um, So we actually played at all three observatories in that area, but it was just an incredible experience to play underneath this giant radio telescope. We played for about 40 minutes, I think. There's a couple of other clips on YouTube. And it was just an amazing experience to be there up quite high up. It's about 2.5, 3,000 meters, I think, last year. But then they had maybe a couple of hundred people there who'd come along to see the total eclipse. And it was strange, bizarre, frightening almost, but wonderful at the same time. And we did some, as you can see on the La Silla video on YouTube, there's some amazing drone footage we got uh, during the day around that time. So no, it was an incredible experience. And then we played the piece of music that I wrote for uh, for the eclipse just before the eclipse, which doesn't happen very often. Um, so yeah, I've got various other tracks completed. I've got a track called Moonrise over Paranal, which is with already mixed. I've got a track called X15 already mixed, which features a guest appearance by Steve Hackett. Um, and there's various other ideas in different stages. So I'm probably between a half and two-thirds of the way through that record. And once I finish, now I've finished the Bioscope album. I'm 90% of the way through finishing the album I've been doing with Steve Hackett. The next on the list is finishing the Reverend Tooley album.
And what does the title mean?
Reverend Tooley is Finnish for Firefox, for the in mythical beast that its tail sweeps the snow into the sky, and it's basically the aurora borealis. That's where their myth comes from. Of the That's where it comes from. This the Firefox's tail. So it's quite a beautiful poetic image. Um, and all the Finnish people that I've come across are very excited about the concept of calling it that. So I really have got to get round to finishing it.
All right, well, tell me about this duo album with Steve Hackett. What kind of material are you working on together?
Um, it's all instrumental. Uh, I was trying to pull something out of Steve that maybe harken back a little bit in time because, when I joined Marillion, I mean, it was not that long after Spectral Mornings came out, which is still one of my favorite of his albums. And I love that aspect of his playing. So um, it's very diverse. There's a track where he's played a lot of blues harmonica, which we'll probably have the prog police hammering at the door over. Uh, but it evolves into all these different movements, and at the end, it's a classic, beautiful thing with acoustic guitars and voices, and yeah, it's again, it's quite cinematic. One of the tracks sounds a little bit like a spy movie to start off with, but then it goes into some fantastic melodies. Uh, but it's some of the best playing I've ever heard from him, or at least for the last 40 years. So he said something really nice a couple of days ago about it. He said what's great about this record is it just feels like an extension of our friendship, which I thought was a lovely thing to hear from someone who, was always such a hero and an influence to me. A lot of the themes on the album have a nautical connection. That's about all I can give you.
So tell me how your two guitar approaches intersect and complement each other on this record.
Um, for probably three-quarters of the tracks, I've come up with the basic kind of structures, and Steve's playing on top of it. But there's times when we both playing and we can't tell who's playing what because there is an overlap. Obviously, he's a huge influence, but so's Andy Latimer and Dave Gilmour to me. So they're the three that kind of informed how I approach playing the guitar. But it's really fun when you're doing something like that, and you can't tell. We have to have Ricardo, the keyboard player, who's also engineering and co-producer of the album, say, "Oh, this is you, and this is you," because we are almost like singing from the same book, really. But it's a wonderful thing. I think it's going to be a really special album. So it's something again that's been a long time coming, but will be worth the wait.
Well, let's go back to your debut solo album, The Ghost of Pripyat from 2014. And we were discussing storytelling before, and this record has a very deep story behind it. Reflect on that and tell me what made you want to explore that very emotional topic matter in instrumental form.
Um, I read a book by an American photojournalist called Would You Stay that dealt with the disaster in Pripyat and also the Fukushima reactor meltdown. And it was like talking to the people who, you know, some people who refused to move even though it was no longer safe. Usually, like in the Ukraine, usually the guys that would tend to succumb to the radiation sickness sooner than the women. I mean, a lot of elderly widows still live there. Um, I'm reading about the disaster and the insane sacrifice that they made to try and minimize the damage. And the thousands of people, soldiers and workers that went out to basically clear off the subsoil, the topsoil after the initial um, incident, and how many of them then died. Um, and there was all these different aspects to the ghosts. The ghosts could be like I say, these elderly widows who still lived there. It could be the ghosts of the workers who died in the tragedy. It could also be there's a lot of people who live there on the edge of it because it's not monitored, so they can kind of live on the edge of society. I mean, maybe criminals or drug dealers or whatever. So they were like the ghosts as well. So it was the three things in my mind that I thought would kind of um, could be described by the whole thing of the ghosts of Pripyat. So yeah, I mean that whole album again. I'm thinking of themes and thinking of um, I don't know, once you name a track, it tells you what it needs to be, almost, if that makes sense. Like White Pass, once I named that and knew what I was having to try to portray in the music, the bleakness and the desperation. Um, so yeah, it just really helps. It helps me to solidify in my mind what something represents once you get to that process creatively where you can give it a name.
Now, you said at the time of the release that the record represented the culmination of 30 years of ideas you had in your head. Tell me how it reflected that accumulation.
Um, I think it was maybe 30 years of frustration of me not being able to make a solo album. There's a story that goes all the way back 40 years to Berlin, and we were making the Misplaced Childhood album. And I had an idea then for a solo project called Ravenscar that was going to be a little rockier than Marillion. And had a couple of ideas I thought worked really well. At the same time, Fish had a concept for a solo album. He wanted to do a Phil Collins and do lots of cover versions, and the theme was going to be this guy who's a ghost rider, someone who's driving down the wrong side of the autobahn to commit suicide, basically, and he's listening to all these songs that remind him of whatever's gone the hell wrong in his life. But anyway, we both had these ideas for solo projects, and the A&R guy from EMI was came over to hear the sessions, and we both pitched him our ideas for the solo projects, and he said yes to mine and no to Fisher's, which was I think a bit of a shock to Fish. But anyway, the upshot of that was Fish had me pinned against the wall in the bar downstairs from the studio, accusing me of saving all my best ideas for my solo album. And considering that I kind of wrote sort of 85% of Misplaced Childhood, it was a ridiculous statement. But anyway, it kind of it pushed the idea of a solo project deep down into my psyche. I think, to be revisited at some point in the future. And obviously, I did the two Wishing Tree albums first, but then I was approached to play at the International Guitar Festival in Plovdiv in Bulgaria. Um, and my original idea was I was just going to do it with my friend Dave Foster and just a laptop with some loops, and we just make some noises for 40 minutes or so. But then they turned around and said well, they'd like me to play for an hour and a quarter. So then I realized that wasn't going to work. So I had to put together a band. Then I had to write some music that I could perform in that context. And most of the ideas from the Ghost of Pripyat were born from desperation, that writing session to have something to play.
All right. Well, in recent years, you've played a bunch of solo gigs, and you take a pretty interesting approach in that you explore earlier eras of Marillion music that the core band rarely approaches any longer itself. Tell me about your interest in revisiting that material on your own.
Well, for a start, a lot of the early material I was kind of responsible for. Yeah, certain songs, I kind of wrote the majority, songs, all of the music. So it just felt right that I should play some of this music because we made a decision when Steve Hogarth joined the band that he would never have to perform any of the Fish material he wasn't comfortable with. Some of it you can only maybe make work if you take on certain aspects of Fish's vocal delivery, and we never would have asked Steve to do that. Which means that huge chunks of our catalog just hasn't been played for 36 years, 37 years. So with my solo thing, I only started out playing the Ghost of Pripyat, and then I thought, well, I could play some of these old Marillion songs. I know a guy who's a great singer, Martin Jakubski, who sings in a Marillion tribute band, who's Scottish. And we could do a few Marillion songs as well, and that worked well, and that gradually evolved. Yeah, to the point where I did the whole of Misplaced Childhood and the whole of Clutching at Straws. And yeah, it's very, very successful. Playing some quite large shows. The last tours we did more of a mixture, so it was the Fish era and the H era, which again worked really well. I've got a great band, and they do the music justice, and it's yeah, it's a lot of fun to do. I haven't done any this year. Hopefully we'll do some at the end of next year, in between all my other commitments and the Marillion tour and album.
What do your friends and colleagues in Marillion itself make of this approach you take?
Oh, who have you been talking to? I think some people in the band are maybe jealous, maybe because they would like to do some of that stuff, and we can't play it anymore because of like the situation we're in, which is, the band is we're about where we are now and where we have been really since Steve joined the band in '89. So yeah, that's the first priority and always has been. But I mean, Steve Hogarth goes out and plays solo shows. He did a show with this Italian band Ranastrane where he played, I think, 12 out of the 14 songs were Marillion songs. So I mean, there's no kind of difference in that respect. Um, that yeah, it's a thing. Is you have to find a balance, really.
Now, these solo gigs of yours also coincide with the release of the revisiting of the back catalog in these ultra super deluxe editions. Talk about going back to those records once again and the process of creating a package that makes fans want to, dip in once more.
Well, I mean, we're not directly responsible for a lot of that, but we do have a team of people like Mike Hunter, the producer, and Simon, our designer, who will make every effort to pull everything together to make it as an interesting and high value a package as possible. Because you don't want to fleece your fans; these are your most dedicated fans. So it's an opportunity sometimes to do a documentary and talk about the production and the writing of a record, if you can remember it, because some of these go back a long way. So you have to rack your brain sometimes to be able to get everything in context. But I think we've done a pretty good job so far. I think, and hearing some of the live versions of some of the tracks, I think really helps. See how the band's evolved over the years, maybe, and how we always give everything we can in a live performance as well as on record. So, I mean, there are some, exceptional live performances on some of these re-releases.
Well, speaking of Marillion, give me an update on the next Marillion album and the directions you're exploring for it.
Well, we go back in the studio August the 12th to start work again. I think on the last count, we had 5,000 ideas on the band's SoundCloud account, but I think there's been another 30 or 40 added since then. So we're not short of ideas, but because of the way we work, of the improvising and then arranging the the sections, it's impossible to say how long it will take. Sometimes, it's we can get some music that we find interesting. But if Steve doesn't feel inspired by it, he's not going to sing on it. So it's not going to turn into a song. So sometimes he'll come back to something that's been put on the shelf and have another go. But quite often, I think he has to feel the excitement of being in the room when the idea is born to really get galvanized to um, really put something into it.
Tell me about the SoundCloud approach. How does that collaborative element work for you?
Well, basically, all the ideas are recorded multi-track, but bounced down into stereo files. So we then try and agree a favorites list. So after 5,000, maybe get it down to 300 ideas we all love, because I think it's very important that everyone's on board for whichever ideas you're going to spend months trying to hammer into songs. Um, so yeah, we'll gradually whittle it down to maybe 20. But we do have such different tastes. We did a thing on the last album where we each had to choose our favorite, I think, 10 ideas out of 100, and not one person in the band chose the same idea out of their choices, which tells you all you need to know about about how Marillion works as a band. It's like when we agree on something, when that Venn diagram happens, and that's yes, that's something we can all get on board with. But until that moment, everyone has their own perspective on what is good.
My assumption would be is that there's still a tremendous sense of accomplishment and relief when you guys get a record together. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, I enjoy that process. Steve Hogarth hates loads and detests it. I think he'd happily never make another record again, just because I think it draws so much out of him. I think he finds it quite painful. Uh, but it's what we are, it's what we do, and I think it's one of the reasons the band is still at the top of its game. I think is because we are current. We're not a nostalgia band. We're about what we've created in the moment. In on our last record, on our last three records.
Well, it's been quite a long time since the band visited the US. What are your thoughts about the group returning here at some point?
Well, we're doing Cruise to the Edge, so we'll be in Miami next March. But um, yeah, it's a difficult one, really. It's hard to make it work financially. The costs now are so high. All the visas for the band and the crew, the withholding tax, the fact that Marillion as an entity it's a lot of people, it's a lot of equipment. It has to generate a certain amount of income just to break even. Um, and also we'd be playing the same clubs we first played 41 years ago. So because, we've not really advanced, I don't think. I mean, there's certain cities, New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, probably Washington, Philadelphia. Um, yeah, you can play to a slightly larger crowd, but generally, you're still looking at between 6 and 1,200 people, really. So it's difficult, and also it's such a huge country, so the logistics involved in touring usually means spending 6 months or at least a couple of months on a tour bus. And I'm 65. I feel like I've done my time on a tour bus. Thank you very much. I'd rather sleep in a hotel.
All right. Well, how do you look back at your work with the Wishing Tree and its two-album journey?
With great fondness. I love making those albums. I'm very proud of both of them. Um, it's just such a strange situation. I think some of the music is exceptional on some of those records, but it just didn't resonate with the Marillion fan base. So certain parts of the world, they seemed to get it. And we did 3 or 4 TV shows in Italy. The Japanese label wanted to pay to fly us over to Japan for some shows. But generally speaking, yeah, I don't know. It just didn't happen, which was a shame because Anna's one of my best friends, and we had such great fun working together. And maybe one day we'll do another album, but I don't know.
Is there an element of criticality in projects in terms of having them, be understood by the Marillion fan base? Is that something that's sort of part of the marketing process?
That's so much been understood as maybe they didn't want to hear whatever it is I do against a female voice. Or maybe it was just Hannah's voice they didn't like. I don't know. It's really impossible to judge. Um, but it's one of those things with the wishing tree. The people that get it absolutely love it, quite fanatical about it. But unfortunately, most people, it just seemed to pass them by.
All right. Well, my last question for you is, how would you describe the creative drive and spirit that inhabits and informs you at this point in your life?
Um, Music is my life. It's all I've ever wanted to do. It's all I'm any good at, pretty much. Probably makes me slightly dysfunctional as a person. But yeah, it's 24/7, really. It occupies my thoughts and the desire to create, more to create than to tour and play live, I'd say. I think I always feel a little bit like you're acting a role when you perform live. I mean, it can be great fun. It is with my solo band, but sometimes, yeah, you feel a little bit of a fraud. Um, but to create something from nothing, to conjure forth um, something beautiful um, from the basic spark of an idea, or maybe a little bit of inspiration that can then evolve and take a life of its own, and then resonate with people. Uh, I mean, that is fantastic. I've always said it's the closest thing to real magic there is in the world.
All right. Well, that is all I had for you. I appreciate you being so generous with your time.
You're very welcome. It's good to see you, and nice to talk to you again.